Hey, world history students. It's me again, Mr. Sunday. I think we're on lesson number 6. And the last time we were together, we were talking about the King of France, Henri IV, who got assassinated after 27 attempts. Now, Henri, if you remember, he was married to Marguerite, who was the daughter of the last king. After they were married for about 17 years, she couldn't have any kids. So he divorced her. Now, how bad is that? Come on, that's kind of whack. The woman that got him the spot to be on the throne, he divorced her, but they had to have an heir to the throne. So Henri married another Medici, Marie de Medici, and they had a child which he named Louis. Now Louis became King Louis XIII after his father's assassination. He was just a boy. So most of the time, the decisions to rule France were made by this really important cardinal, a member of the Catholic Church. His name was Richelieu. And Richelieu was a genius, and he helped run France through most of Louis XIII's reign. Louis XIII sadly didn't live to be an old man. He was kind of sickly. He had intestinal problems, he had tuberculosis, and to top it all off, his doctors weren't really super advanced. They were constantly giving him enemas and bloodletting, letting the blood out of his veins because they thought it was bad blood, and that contributed to an early death for Louis XIII. After Louis XIII passed away in his 40s, the throne went on to his firstborn son, who was only 5 years old. And what do you think his name was? It was Louis, so now we have Louis XIV. Louis XIV will be one of the most famous kings in all of Europe, the most famous kings in world history. And he became king at 5 years old. He holds the record for the longest reigning monarch in European history. 72 years he will be king of France. Now, Queen Elizabeth of England today, she's gunning for that title. She's at year 68 right now. I don't know if she can hold on for 72, 73 years. We'll find out. She's already in her 90s. Go Queen Elizabeth. There were a couple of events that happened to King Louis XIV that really played a role in how he felt about the people of France. The first occurred when he was just a little boy. Remember, he was 5 years old when he was the king. He was in his palace one night with his little brother, who was about 3 years old, and their mother, her name was Queen Anne. Well, some peasants overpowered the palace guards in Paris and broke right into the palace. It was the middle of the night, and they were hungry. They were starving. We're hungry. We're hungry. We want to see the king. We want to see the king. Well, Louis up in his bedroom, trembling with fear. He thinks these are monsters that have broken into his palace and want to eat him. Fortunately, his mother, Queen Anne, was a pretty smart woman. She stood at the top of the staircase on this balcony overlooking all the peasants down below her, and she very calmly quieted them all down, and when she understood that they were starving, she ordered her servants to bring in food from a royal kitchen to feed all these hungry peasants. And after they had something to eat and they kind of quieted down, she asked them all to quietly leave, and she would do something about it. And she was successful. They all left that night, and no harm was done. But every night after that, the young King Louis XIV, he laid in bed every night fearing it was going to happen again. The second event occurred when he was in his teens, and he was kind of running France on his own as the new young king. It happened in the series of a small revolution, what I would call some civil wars. His nobility started it. They were upset about some new taxes that were imposed upon the nobles, and they tried to fight against the king. But Louis had a really, really polished army that had been fighting in Europe, and the Civil War was put down. A few years later, some of the bourgeoisie, some of the working class, didn't like the taxes either, and they tried to fight against the king as well. But once again, Louis's highly trained army put down this rebellion as well. Both these events in his life led Louis not to really trust the French people or even his own nobility that much. He had to really instill himself as the overall absolute monarch of all of France. Whatever he said was the law. He even had a nickname. He called himself the Sun King, like S-U-N, the sun in the sky, meaning he shone over France just like the sun, and all of his will be done. One of his biggest contributions to Paris and for all of the nobility after him was he didn't feel safe living in Paris. He wanted to find a new place to live his life as the king. So he scouted out a location, a little hunting lodge that his father used to use, about 11 miles outside of Paris. And a huge construction project started. And he built the most beautiful, the largest palace in all of Europe, probably in all the world at this time. It's called the Palace at Versailles. This palace was enormous. It had a huge main section and 2 wings on either side. The main section alone was 3 football fields long. The other sections on either side were 1 football field long on either side. The entire place held over 2,000 rooms, complete with banquet halls and all kinds of meeting halls, elaborate bedrooms. Louis's bedroom was immense, and he had a reason for having this palace so big. Oh, and the gardens too. The gardens, there were almost 1,000 different fountains in all the gardens surrounding this enormous palace. The reason he needed so much space is Louis did not trust his nobility. He required them to come visit him at his palace, and he would occupy all their times with all kinds of events, tennis tournaments, hunting games, all kinds of things. And he had these massive banquets and stuff. And he wanted to keep their minds off of going home and plotting against him. Now, they didn't live there all year long, but he would invite them whenever they least expected it, and to turn down an invitation was an insult. So he was constantly entertaining all the time, and he could eat. He wasn't a very big man. He was only about 5'6", but he brought into fashion men wearing these great big heels and these huge wigs, and he used to walk with a cane because he didn't want to topple over from walking in these heels. He looked to be about 6 feet tall, but he wasn't really that tall. And he dressed in a grand style. He spent money all over the place. He was worse than a Kardashian. And he would have all of these ceremonies that he required everybody to come to. And my favorite was called Lever ceremony. It was the waking up of the king. He had all of his noblemen. Every morning, all the noblemen had to come into his massive bedroom and wake him up every morning. He had this big 4-poster bed with curtains pulled around it, and he would lay in there. Of course, he didn't usually spend the night in his own bed. Behind his bed was a secret passage that would lead to other bedrooms in his palace, because he was a major player, and he loved to sneak into Mademoiselle's bedchambers in the middle of the night and have his little affairs with everybody. So don't be surprised if you're a woman and you're sleeping in one of the king's bedrooms, you hear a little door slide in here. Bonsoir, mademoiselle. Anyway, every morning, all the nobility had to come into his bedroom, all the noblemen. They had to come into his bedroom, and there was a secretary who would keep track of everyone who would come, make sure they'd check off their name. Oh, he's here, he's here, he's here. And then his favorite guy for that day, if you were lucky enough, you got to be the one to open up the curtains and say, "Wake up, Your Majesty." And he would wake up, and then he would scoot out of his bed, and he would sit on the edge of his bed, and then everyone would dress him. They'd start at the bureau, and they'd pull out His Majesty's royal underwear, and they'd all pass it around, and everybody had to touch it, and then you were the lucky guy to hold it while the king stepped in his royal underwear. And then His Majesty's royal undershirt. And they would do that for his massive outfit that he wore with all these different layers and his big coat and his cane. And he'd put his wig on and powder his face and pluck his nose hairs or whatever he needed. And then you would all go have breakfast together. And as he walked out, he would walk by, and everyone had to say, "Good morning, Your Majesty, good morning, Your Majesty, good morning, Your Majesty." And the secretary would be right there checking off, making sure everyone was saying good morning to the king as he passed by. Now, Louis was a real trendsetter. Once word got out that he was doing this, everybody in Europe wanted to copy Louis's ideas. The people in other countries were building big palaces, and they would all have all these big ceremonies. Even in the United States of America, when we became a country about 100 years later, George Washington, the very first president of the United States, decided he wanted to have a morning ceremony like that too. Now, he didn't have people dress him, but when he stayed in his presidential mansion, this was before the White House was built, he had his entire staff, his cabinet, come outside of his bedroom and wait for him every morning as he stepped out fully dressed, and he wanted everyone to greet him in the morning. "Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. President." It was a ceremony he loved. After he was done being president, John Adams carried on the tradition too, the second president. "Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. President." Then the third president, Thomas Jefferson. Before he had his first night in the White House, he was in the White House, they told him, okay, Mr. President, in the morning we have this ceremony. You're going to get up, you're going to come out, you're going to greet everybody. He's like, why? He goes, well, it's just a tradition. He goes, it's a stupid tradition. We can't do that anymore. And they said, no, everyone's expecting it. He went, okay, fine. Well, Thomas Jefferson purposely overslept his first day as President of the United States. He stayed in bed like an hour longer than he should have been coming out. And everybody was outside of his bedroom waiting. Is he awake yet? I don't know. Go look. No, you go look. Well, finally, he comes stumbling out in his underwear. He comes out of his underwear. He's like, and he looks around. He goes, what the hell are you guys all doing here? And they all went, oh, and they all ran away. And it never, ever happened again. He quit this stupid royalty tradition that had gotten started by George Washington. Anyway, back to King Louis XIV. Louis was a smart man. And he had incredible advisors helping to make decisions. One of the most brilliant men that worked with him was a guy named Jean-Baptiste Colbert. He was his Minister of Finances. And Colbert was a magician with numbers. And France, during Louis's reign, became the most powerful country in all of Europe. They were very wealthy. They had tons of industry coming in from their new American colony, Canada. Lots of lumber, lots of furs. He built industry throughout the nation. They were doing a really good job. But the big problem with Louis XIV is he just lived too long. As he went on in life, all of his advisors started dying on him. He outlived his oldest born son, who couldn't wait to be king, but he got sick and passed away. And the son of his firstborn son got sick and died too. And the grandson of his firstborn son died before any of those guys had a chance to become king. And as all these people are passing away, Louis is starting to make some not so good decisions in his reign. He started getting involved in a whole bunch of pretty useless wars, and wars so expensive it starts depleting his treasury a little at a time. And the stupidest thing he ever did when he was king is to assert himself as a Catholic monarch, a Bourbon. Remember, he's part of the Bourbon dynasty. He revoked the Edict of Nantes, that incredible document that his grandfather put into place that allowed Huguenots to worship freely through all of France. They got to have their religion untested by anyone else. Now, when this happened, the Huguenots that were living in France, they didn't get scared. They just moved away. They decided, well, we'll get out of France. And the result was that Louis lost a bunch of really talented tradesmen in France. A lot of industry people who were really good at their jobs, they just left France and went other places to work. Now, this didn't have a huge result on Louis's reign, but little by little by little, France will become less financially solvent. Their treasury will start to deplete a little at a time. And Louis's spending of money won't affect him that much. And it won't affect his great-grandson, who becomes King Louis XV, that much. But the next person later, Louis XVI, would be his great-grandson, great-great-grandson, will be the next king of France. It will start to hurt him. They are still spending money, and less money is coming in. And their solution to the whole problem would be to tax the people even more. And this will lead to the end of the monarchy in France in a French Revolution that will happen in 1789. Way after Louis XIV had passed away. Louis passed away in 1715. The revolution against the monarchy will happen for Louis XVI in 1789. Well, that's all I'm going to talk about today. That was a long-winded story with no whiteboard. I miss you guys. I wish we could be together, but I'll talk to you again really soon. Thanks.